What's up, peeps? It's been a while, and I want to apologize to you guys because I've been a bit under the weather, so I'm a bit late getting my new episode up. But I'm back, and this week we're going to be talking about one of my favorite animes. It's Bleach, my favorite of the big three. And somewhere in the annals of Twitter and social media, you will find that people are still arguing over what constitutes the big three. But here in my house, we say it's One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach. And One Piece has taken me many places, and one of these days I'll do a series of episodes that go over that. But I'm going to start this one with my favorite. So, Bleach came to me during a time when I was extremely depressed. I had gone through a breakup, which I think I touched on in my episode about all things that I love JT. So 2012 and 2013 weren't great years for me. And it was me kind of slowly getting back to myself. And, 2012 is when JT's album came out, and it was great. But 2013 is when I started watching Bleach. I was introduced to it by a close old friend of mine that we had rekindled our friendship after being away for many years. And he had said to me, I watch a lot of anime, and I think there's one that you might like. And I was thinking, most of the time, and I always say this, but most of the time, when people recommend things to me, I always get around to it, but my hopes aren't really that high, right? That you could recommend something that's going to stick with me in that way. It may be something that I enjoy, but I might not think about it again. Well, little did I know that this was going to be my hyperfixation for a few years to come. So here we are. So it's always weird that I say I started watching it in 2013 because by that time it had gone on hiatus. So there are people that'll tell you like, hey, if you hadn't watched these shows on YouTube in 3 parts, then you're not really an anime fan. So do with that information what you will. But I hadn't watched anime in many years. When I was a kid, when people say like, did you watch anime? I watched anything that came on Toonami. So like, Dragon Ball After School, Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, really anything that came on Toonami. But I hadn't been in high school in a while, and like it had been years since I hung out with this friend. So it had been a while since I watched anime, just know that. But by the time I got to it, it had already gone on hiatus. But that didn't stop me. I'm jumping back into it. So it aired from 2004 to 2012, and there were 366 episodes that follow Ichigo Kurosaki when he becomes a Soul Reaper. He gets his powers from another Soul Reaper, Rukia, and he's quote unquote, to have to be a Soul Reaper for the Soul Society, and use his powers to defend the humans from the Hollows that are trying to stay on Earth after they've departed. and kind of get them to the afterlife. And it's weird when you're listening to your friend kind of describe what this show is about. You're like, what? So it gave me like the Sixth Sense vibes, but he turned it on, and I remember thinking, I'll just see what this one episode is about. But I didn't feel like doing much or taking in much. So it was very hard to kind of understand why he wanted me to see it. But it wasn't until after I watched the first episode that I was like, okay. So, I will say that, Dragon Ball Z being probably the last one that I had watched, because, I watched Sailor Moon and Speed Racer and all of these things. But, I was used to a particular type of anime protagonist. And that's probably why he wanted to show me this. But, Ichigo lives in this town. He's a 15-year-old boy. He just kind of wants to go to school, be a high school student. He already has kind of the typical 15-year-old issues. I'm going to school. I've got the standout orange hair. Everybody thinks I'm a delinquent, but somehow I make the honor roll every year, top percentile. But that doesn't stop me from getting into fights, because I will beat your ass. So it's kind of a give and take. He lives with his dad. He lives with his twin sisters, and his mother has passed away. And that's really kind of all you get as far as his home life. And then all kind of shit pop off. So, I think in the first episode, Rukia climbs in his window, and one of the things that's always entertaining to me is that Ichigo is introduced in the first episode as a 15-year-old boy who can see ghosts, speak to, communicate with ghosts, right? And so he's kind of always trying to finish their unfinished business so that they can move on. So him being recruited to be a substitute Soul Reaper, I believe was always in the cards. But I've had several discussions about that with anime nerds, and there are people that disagree. But when you figure out like who his father is and who he's related to, like, this was probably always in the cards. But anyway, yeah, so they introduce you to Ichigo as the boy who could see ghosts. And at some point during the episode, Rukia, who has come from the Soul Society to kind of figure out why these hollow creatures are appearing in this town that Ichigo lives in at a high rate, she kind of climbs in his window, and it's kind of innocuous in her decision because she thinks that nobody can see her, so she kind of moves around in that way. However, as the boy who could see ghosts, he's watching her the whole time. She's like walking around the room and different things. And he's like, "Who the hell are you?" And she's like, "What? You could see me?" And then, sometimes people will tell you you can remember when your life has gone off course. So probably for him, that was it. But it always made me laugh because he seems, perturbed by her climbing through the window, because to him, she doesn't look like a ghost. But I would, he's like, "Who the hell are you? I'm going to hold you down," or whatever. And she tries to like subdue him because she can't believe that this human can see her. And I believe that was our first clue. But he breaks out of being subdued. They're arguing back and forth, and then like they're attacked by a hollow. So she does her best to kind of hold her own, but she ends up being really hurt. And the only thing that she can do is, give her Soul Reaper spiritual powers to Ichigo so that he can finish off the hollow. He becomes the substitute Soul Reaper, and that is what happens in the episode. He's going to kill the hollow. She's yelling instructions at him, and it was very intense for a first episode. I remember being like, whatever happens here, I have to see this through to the very end. So I knew I was in it for the long haul when she stabbed him in the chest with her Zanpakuto. So it is what it is. But he makes quick work of the hollow. Quick, quote unquote, is the term I'm going to use because there's only so much time in this podcast episode. But he disposes of the hollow, and he's ready to give her powers back, but it doesn't necessarily work like that. And I saw kind of immediately why my friend wanted to show me this episode, because Ichigo is not like Goku in that way, and he's in for me, when I had watched anime, all of the main characters were kind of the same. So Ichigo was the first one. I have not yet seen Yusuke. I will, because I have a thing for these kind of main characters, but I have a list, so y'all are gonna have to bear with me, okay? But up to this point, I had not seen a main character that was not interested in being the main character who this story is about. I want to be left alone. I want to be able to go to school. I want to be a normal kid. Sadly, that is not in the cards for your boy. With Rukia coming into town, when Ichigo gets to school, we also learn that she doesn't have use of her powers, so she's gonna have to kind of go to school with him and kind of coach him through being the substitute. So you're gonna have to step in for me, and he absolutely does not want to do that. Take your powers back, leave me alone, go away. Again, not gonna happen. So it is what it is. But when he gets to school, we also realize that there are other classmates, Uryu Ishida, Orihime, Sato, who they call Chad, that have abilities that are spiritually aware as well as Ichigo. So all of them kind of are going to come together at some point to do the hollow fighting, killing of the hollows. But the first official story arc is when Rukia is sentenced to death for giving Ichigo her powers. That's a big no-no. She was sentenced to death. This trial is that there's no way around it. And I think she, being as old as she was, had to know that when I do this, they're not going to hear me out. So, while Ichigo is running around fighting hollows and being coached by her, there's this idea that he is great at what he's doing, but he's kind of stumbling through it. Shit hits the fan when her older brother, Byakuya, who's captain level, and an old friend of hers, Renji, come to take her back to the Soul Society so that she could be, you know, beheaded or whatever. And there is an obvious gap between the substitute and the captain. And through the course of those few episodes that lead you into what's going to be the Soul Society arc or the rescue arc or whatever you want to call it, you get to realize that Ichigo's mother was killed, or had died in his mind, or, you know, he hadn't quite figured out what killed his mother. It's Rukia that sheds light on the fact that it was probably a Grand Fisher Hollow that killed his mother. In the grand scheme of shonen anime, the fact that you have a protagonist that's mother was killed is pretty common. I think the only time that I've seen where this protagonist has a mother so far has been My Hero Academia. But then again, I still haven't figured out what happened to that boy's father, but that's a story for another time. So anyway, the thing that makes Ichigo different is that he has a father that's very kind of hands-on, and maybe I'll elaborate on that later. Maybe in another episode. We'll see how this goes. But Ichigo, it feels kind of, you know, indebted to Rukia. He has to save her. Why would he not save her? And so we're introduced to Kisuke Urahara and Mr. Yoruichi. As we're told in the beginning, you find out later that that's not entirely true. They don't tell us, you know, why these two are in the real world. But it's very apparent that these two know a lot about the Soul Society. They've obviously come from the Soul Society, and they're willing to train Ichigo, because one of my favorite quotes is from Kisuke, where he says, you know, you're going to have, you're walking into the lion's den unprepared, and they're going to eat you alive. You know, so there is a training arc. I mean, this is a shonen, so for me, that's not a big deal. I live for that shit. But it wasn't until I got on, you know, anime Twitter that I realized, like, people had legit beefs with Bleach. And I'll get to that in a minute, but that's like the setup for the story. And I just was like, I thought I'm probably going to stick with this. And I remember, like, you know, my friend was like, you know, we'll watch it together or whatever. I couldn't wait on him. He was like doing work, and I needed something other than homework to tide me over. So I watched several episodes without him, and shame on me. But I mean, he had already seen it. Okay. He was introducing me to it. Okay. And why should I have to wait? You know, judge me if you must. But one of the things that kept me around was, not just that the initial story had me kind of hooked, because I wanted to see, like, are they really going to put this girl to death? Is he going to be able to do something about it? What's going to happen? Who are these people who have trained him? I had so many questions. When I get into a story, I have questions initially, and I hope that during the course of the story they get answered. So there's that. But they had pretty great standout characters, from Yoruichi to Kisuke to Ishida, Kenpachi, Byakuya, Renji. Sometimes I think that having too many characters, an ensemble cast, can be a downside for a lot of people, because a lot of times it takes away from your main character. And in the way that my sister likes to say, she has a love for side characters. And if you know anything about anime, that can be dangerous. It can be dangerous. So, but for me, I have to love the main character. I have to love what their plan is to do. And so, like, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to rescue her. Fine. Great. I have to be invested in the main character's need to do this thing that they're trying to do in order for me to like the story. My sister, not so much. But I found that Bleach had a lot of breakout characters that were great. For me, with other anime, like, I really, with Dragon Ball Z, everybody loves Goku. Or, again, when I was younger, everybody loved Goku. And Vegeta came in like a bomb. But I think that, you had kind of 1, 2, or 3 that people wanted to be when I was growing up. Nobody wanted to be Vegeta except for my brother. And the other thing was, the other person was Piccolo. And then there were a few people who wanted to be Gohan, and but in the end, it was only like a few people. In this story, you start out with Ichigo and then Rukia, and then you get a handful of other personalities that are dynamic, that have their own stories, that have their own connections to Ichigo for whatever reason. Or they find out Orihime's brother had passed away. She is living on her own as a high school student. She's living on her own because her older brother passed away. You find out that he passed away but didn't cross over. And he passes away because instead of taking him to the hospital, they bring him by the Kurosaki Clinic, and which is run by Ichigo's father, who's a doctor. But there's not the tools there, or the things there necessary to save her brother. You find out that her brother has not crossed over, right? So he's become a hollow. Uryu or Shida and Ichigo have very similar stories that diverge at a certain point, and so they end up on opposite sides, because just like Soul Reapers are trying to dispose of hollows in a certain way, Ashita comes from a clan called the Quincy's, who also exterminate hollows, but in a different way, probably a way that is detrimental to life as we know it. And then there's a history between the Soul Reapers and the Quincy's, and they don't like each other. There's mass genocide, and of which we find out that Ishida is the only one left, for now, in the 366 episodes. Renji has some sort of beef with Ichigo because of the predicament that he's gotten Rukia into, and all of these things. And it was just too dynamic for me not to try to see how these people's stories tie together. But the biggest thing that came to mind was Mr. Yoruichi and Kisuke Urahara. Urahara always struck me as a person who was highly intelligent and too smart to know how to play dumb. He was too intelligent to know how to be dumb. This man knows something, and no matter what he tells you, it's never the entirety of what he knows, right? I remember thinking, like, when Kisuke was introduced, what is this man's story, and how did he end up here in this candy shop, pretending to be a candy shop owner, but he obviously does other things. And anybody who constantly has to tell you, listen, I just am a lowly candy shop owner. Kisuke is a lot of things. He's a liar. I don't know if he ever sold no damn candy, but you know, what have you. But I remember trying to figure out, like, what was his story and how does that tie into what we're going to find out eventually about the Soul Society. And what you find out eventually about the Soul Society is that they are not great on varying levels. And I'll say not great, but I have other words for them. So, you know, it is what it is. But it had been a long time since I had seen anime, and I've touched on that before earlier. But the way that everybody's story kind of winds together and it all intertwines Ichigo is kind of the thing that also kept me going, because they finally do tell you what the story is behind Kisuke and how he ends up in the real world, but it's many episodes later, you know. And it's a tale rooted in 100 years ago. A battle of the geniuses, if you will, because the main antagonist of the show, Sosuke Aizen, is highly intelligent. There's some that may argue that he is the most intelligent. But for me in my house, we always say it's Kisuke, because one of the things that Aizen knows is that he has to get rid of Kisuke. Whatever plan he's getting ready to unfurl on the unsuspecting people and that will spill into our world, it's not going to happen unless he gets rid of, discredits Kisuke. And he does that in the most interesting way. Kisuke, for his part, was too late in figuring out what was going on. And by the time he had figured it out, Aizen had already framed him for it. And so Kisuke ends up being sentenced to, I can't remember if it's death or a certain amount of time in jail, or like an infinite amount of time in jail or whatever, but he ends up on the run. He's, you know, he hath escaped and had been living in the real world for 100 years. It's not until Ichigo goes to the Soul Society to rescue Rukia that we see Aizen for who he really is. But by that time, he had already like enacted this plan that had been obviously 100 years in the making. And to that point, I say, strike one, Soul Society. Okay. There are a lot of things that we Bleach fans, you know, Bleach fans are kind of chill, but there's a lot of things that we've discussed. But one thing that has remained certain is that if any one of us were Kisuke, we would have told y'all to get somebody else to do it. Don't call us. Don't ask us for no help after the way you treated us. Period. That's where we're at. Another thing that stood out to me is that, you know, you get a sense that even at 15, 16, Ichigo is dealing with some real heavy things, real heavy emotions. And a lot of people who are used to battle shonen, as they're called, we don't get to see a lot of that in battle shonen, and we don't get to see, and a lot of times people don't want to see it, right? So when we first meet Ichigo, he's 15 and he's a bit rough around the edges. I always attributed that to his mom's death. He in the beginning doesn't know why his mother died so suddenly. He takes the blame because in his mind, if they had just gone home and, you know, him not wanting to play around, but I mean, he was 8 at the time, probably younger, 7 or 8, somewhere in there. But it's Rukia that points out, like, your mother was killed by a hollow, a grand fisher. The guilt that he constantly carries with him over the death of his mother is the driving force as to why he wants to protect his friends and family. That was resounding to me at that point. I needed that. I needed somebody who was grappling with something like me and then watching them work through it. He feels at the age 7 or 8 that he should have been the one to protect her. Although at 15, 16, no matter how much his dad says, like, I never blamed you, I never, and you need to let it go. It just doesn't always work like that. And we'll circle back to that because there's a lot that his father, I feel, could have done better. Because there's a certain point in the story where you figure out that, or you're shown that his father is also a soul reaper. Spoiler alert, I guess, but I mean, at this point, it was on the air in 2004. It's been 20 years. So if you don't know, sad for you. If you've been listening to this point, then, you know, sad for you. But there, you know, you're a soul reaper, so you kind of know, you know, what really happened to the mother, the things that, you know, that he's the substitute soul reaper. There are things that you could have shown him and that you didn't, sir. 2 thumbs down. But don't get me wrong, I love Ishin. He's great. But there are periods in the story where he tries to take on things on his own. He is not great at battling things really well, so he pushes all his friends away. So he struggles with letting people in because bad things happen when you let people in. And so he is the embodiment of that. And so some people say, you know, he's real broody. Yeah, well, that's true, but there's a reason for that. So that was one of the things that I enjoyed. And it, you know, taking that guilt and taking that shame and turning it into resolve to try to help out other people. And then the need to kind of be overprotective about people in your circle, because he's the first person to see that, you know, Orihime's dealing with something and he can't quite put his finger on it. Rukia fills in the blanks about, like, you know, her brother's a hollow. You're going to need to dispatch him. But he's keyed in enough to know, like, there's certain things that are going on with his friends that need further inspection or to to ask about it. The only thing that kind of drove me nuts is that you're asking about other people, and then when they ask about you, you're like, oh, everything's fine. And, but typical teenage boy fashion. So there's that. The main antagonist, Sosuke Aizen. I mean, are there any words for him? Not really. He is the main villain for most of the story arc. The original 366. First, he has this plan. He systematically kind of dismantles the Soul Society. He wants to become the Soul King of the Soul Society. And he starts that by blaming Urahara Kisuke for testing the limits between Soul Reaper and Hollow by a process called holification. And he had been testing that out on other Soul Reapers. And poor Kisuke didn't figure that out until it was too late. So a lot of people had been harmed by him, that in a process that can't be reversed, and for much of it, he remained undetected because he was very unassuming, right? He staged his own death, had people running around accusing each other, and this is all going on while Ichigo is supposed to be in his rescue mission to save Rukia from certain death. He faked his own death, and this is a plan that he had taken 100 years to go through, and he's trying to mimic or steal a creation that Kisuke created. I'm going to say it wrong, but the Hoyoku. And I mean, just he's maintaining this cool and calm demeanor. He even had like a lieutenant that she would not see the light, the badness in him. Okay. And she got stabbed for her trouble. And I was like, wow, why didn't you listen to us? And for, most of the series, he kind of just goes through and kind of dismantles the Soul Society from the inside. And they were too busy looking for Kisuke and basically trying to capture and behead this person who really was only doing things to try to better the Soul Society. So again, I say, this be on your head. So, how do we stop Aizen from ruining everything? Well, you have to watch. The other thing that kind of drew me in and kept me was the relationship that Soul Society, Ichigo, Ishida, all of them had in this situation of Soul Society, Soul Reapers versus the Quincy. When we first meet Ishida, he has the pride of being the last Quincy and a hatred of the Soul Society and Soul Reapers in general. And so, because he's known Ichigo for a long time, he does help out where he can, but he doesn't want to do too much to the people who have wronged him. He doesn't want to do too much for them. You know what I mean? In the beginning, I didn't quite get why he harbored resentment, but you get the background on that too. The Quincy's are humans that have the ability to detect the existence of hollows. And they started training to confront hollows in order to defeat them. It starts out kind of the same as the Soul Reapers do. However, because of the way that the Quincy's dispose of hollows, a war erupted between the two groups, right? So Soul Reapers rely on trying to push you through this process, right? So you either, you get attacked, you kill the hollow, and then it goes on to the next stage of the afterlife, whatever that may be. Quincy's, however, kind of destroyed the soul, and there is a delicate balance that the soul society has to have, a number of souls that the soul society has to have in order to not collide with the other world, being Earth. So because the Quincy's kill the hollows and the soul, and kind of threaten the way that the soul society exists, the soul society thought it was a good idea to get rid of the Quincy's once and for all. So, for lack of a better term, a mass genocide, of which I think like Ashita and his father are the only two left, or, during that period of time. And so it just is insanely chaotic. And it all comes to a head in the final story arc, which is the 1,000-year blood war. You think that Ishida is the remaining Quincy, but all kind of shit popping off in the 1,000-year blood war. And maybe, again, that's a story for another time. So get the manga, read it, watch it. It's on Hulu. Do that shit. Another thing that I enjoyed was that there were a lot of characters, female characters that had very badass, kick-ass roles in the story. Nelly L2, Harabelle, Rukia, Yoruichi, just to name a few. They have epic personalities, epic fights. They command respect, and they are just badass, which is, in a shonen, sometimes that doesn't happen. And to this day, I've not seen it done in a really big way since Full Metal Alchemist, Brotherhood. But, it is what it is. I won't get into, I just am not going to get into the whole Orihime being a healer thing, because people have beat that with a dead horse. But she is instrumental in a lot of the things that Ichigo has to get done. So, and I don't know what's wrong with people, but a healer will never be useless to me. So, it is what it is. In Ichigo's case, the good guys don't always win. Very rarely does he encounter a adversary and he beats them the first time out. There's always a piece of the story of his that is left out, that somebody knows, or that fighting them and losing is going to tell him. So Bleach knows how to put our heroes through harrowing losses, and the more that I watch it, the more that I realize, and this is a big deal for people who don't know, but just because you're a protagonist, that doesn't mean you're the good guy. So a lot of what we find out about the Soul Society is not great. Or the Soul Reapers, lived a long time. They've seen a lot of things, but I enjoy that because it shows that, there are villains that are legitimate threats. And, everybody doesn't always have the skill that they need to take out their opponent right away. Like in Ichigo's case, I think he had to fight Grimjaw like twice, 3 times, something like that, But anyway, Grimjow, great guy. But yeah, it was something that my friend used to laugh at me about, because he would be like, here's a main character that doesn't ever win the first time. What's your point? You know, I'm always going to love Ichigo. So, but it is what it is. So I think the last few minutes here, I'm going to talk about the fillers. There is a lot of fillers. And once you get into like reading manga and realizing that the big three was like an ongoing telling of a story, how that takes, hits to the health of the mangaka, then you start realizing what fillers are for. And then you start realizing why shows go on breaks now, why they have hiatuses now. But I've never had a problem with fillers. I just thought that they were, in this particular show, stuck in the worst places. Since I was watching it after it aired, I was able to skip a lot of them and then go back to the main story. But some of the filler arcs were long. But I always take offense when people say, I watched the filler and I didn't think any of it was good. Now I just know you're lying to me. What are you talking about? I found all of them to be interesting when I went back. The Zanbakuto Unknown Tales arc and the Gote 13 Invading Army arc, I really enjoyed. Really enjoyed. People say they hate the Bout arc. It's not fantastic, but I get it. And for those out there who don't know, the Fullbringer arc is not filler. That happens. So it's, people always try to say like, I didn't like it, so therefore it's filler. No, it's not how that works. But there was a lot of filler, I think 45%, which I am glad that when they decided to bring back the show and animate the final arc, that we are getting episodes with content, no filler. But 45% is a lot. So sometimes that is hard to try to sell to people who haven't seen the show and want to see the show. But now that the first 366 are out, maybe we'll get a revamp, like a Brotherhood treatment. Here's to hoping. I had hoped that they would bring the show back after several years. And by the way, it took 10 years from the time that Bleach went on hiatus for it to come back. So anything could happen. Here's to hoping that there's a Brotherhood treatment here. But if there isn't, I enjoyed the original story as it was. But yeah, you can roll through it. You'll be entertained. If you don't have anything to do one day, just watch some Bleach filler. It's good shit. And then finally, the 4 Bleach movies. I had to go out and buy these on DVD because I couldn't find them online anywhere. The great thing about the movies is that they shed spotlight on other characters. Urahara in action in the Soul Society. The issue with Toshiro, who had the same Bankai as someone else. It was really weird, really compelling story. They were animated well. I love all of them. So don't ask me to pick a favorite, but there are 4 Bleach movies. But in the end, I remember sitting on my friend's couch to this day, and he put on the first episode. I was intrigued enough by the story of Ichigo and company to want to find out what was going to happen to all of these characters. And here I am 10 years later, still waiting to see how this all turns out. Kubo, who wrote the manga, drew the manga, and is, the consultant on all things Thousand Year Blood War. I'm glad that he's back. I'm glad that he's feeling better. He's, talking about giving us new content. I need that in my life. But anyway, peeps, that's everything that I enjoy about Bleach for now. Maybe I'll do an episode talking about like my favorite moments. Maybe. But anyways, for those of you that haven't seen it, you're missing out. And for those of you who have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. I got to get through more of the Blood War, but I will. And that's all for now, peeps.